Hey, good morning, Horizon Church. Hope you guys are all doing well. So, yeah, that was those of you who looked at the thumbnail. I'm going to adjust this a little bit. Those of you who looked at the thumbnail, that is a picture of Dexter the Peacock, who became famous in 2018 when United Airlines would not let Dexter board a flight as a service peacock. A service animal. Great story. So I wanted to tell you the story about Dexter, but actually a little bit kind of random thoughts about trust and a society of trust. And I was pondering this because I was reading an article 2 nights ago, I think it was, from the morning call Donna brought home from the office. And I'm getting a real glare, so I don't know what you guys are seeing. Maybe the glare is better than my face. So anyway, I'll leave it. Yeah, so I was reading an article about why Pennsylvanians, and I don't know if this is true, I have no idea, but an article in the morning called about why Pennsylvanians have given up trust on the numbers coming out of the governor's office. I have no idea if that's true, if people have given up trust or not, but according to that article, people at HiPAT, and actually, interestingly, I guess a couple, maybe a month or so, I happened. Well, I'm not even going to go into that story. Sorry, I said these are disorganized thoughts. But anyway, so I was pondering about trust when I read that article and about what's going wrong. And I don't know about you, but I remember a day when you could put some tomatoes out on your sidewalk and put a little jar. And good morning, Seal. I'm glad you're here, Seal, and I appreciated your update, your email update. Glad you're doing well. You could put out hi Phyllis, put out tomatoes and put out a jar, and you could trust that people are going to take a tomato and put some money in a jar, or firewood. I used to go. Well, we go camping. We have in the past. And you could drive along the road near campgrounds, and you'd see a pile of firewood, and there'd be a little container, and people would trust that you'd pick up firewood, you'd put the right amount of money in. Or even, do you remember a time when you could put packages at your door and you would trust that they would be there at the end of the day when you got home from work? And we didn't have to have security cameras on our packages, and we didn't have to have Amazon giving, taking those little photos and sending us photos and all the hullabaloo that we have to go through anymore, because we don't have trust anymore in our society. So you can't trust that if Amazon puts a package on your front door, it's going to be there. And there was a time when that was not true. Now, maybe I'm looking back at the good old days that never existed. I don't know, but I certainly remember the time, like I said, you could put tomatoes on a bench on your front sidewalk and trust that people were going to pick a tomato and put a quarter in the can. But so that led me to the story of Dexter the Peacock. Now, Dexter the Peacock, obviously, this is not the biggest problem facing our country right now, but I think it's actually kind of symptomatic of some of the stuff that's going on in our world. So here's the story of Dexter the Peacock. Way back in 1986, there was a federal law that prohibited discrimination against people with any kind of a disability. And I know we're all familiar with some of the acts, the ADA, et cetera, things like that. And that was a really good law for the most part. And it also prohibited discrimination against people, not only with a physical disability, but even non-physical disabilities. And as it applied to airlines and service animals, that meant that a blind person with a dog, a service dog, could not be kept off a flight, and nor could you keep his dog off a flight because the dog was necessary to him. And that's a good thing, people who are blind shouldn't face discrimination because of their blindness. And they also recognize that there are some non-physical disabilities. Autistic kids, for example, often do so much better with a service dog or a service pet. So that law said you can't discriminate against people with physical or even non-physical disabilities. And that was a really good thing. And for the most part, as a society, we simply trusted that people who had service animals needed them, and it really wasn't a problem. But what happened is slowly there was this momentum that built. Slowly, people started to realize that, hey, I'm getting charged. For example, one airline. This isn't an advertisement for any airline, so I won't mention any names. One airline would charge $125 to have an animal travel with you. So people started to realize, well, no, wait a minute. I can save a bunch of money by saying that this pet, my dog, is a service dog. I won't have to pay the $125 fee, and I can fly my dog more cheaply. And so I actually just checked this. I was looking at this, and you can go. So there's a whole industry now, still exists, a whole industry now to get your pet labeled as a service dog or an emotional support animal, not only a dog, but an emotional support animal. You can go on Amazon right now and you can get a service dog vest for $16.88. You can also, with some of them, not only do you get the vest, but you get a little badge that says, this was kind of big news back in 2018 with Dexter to Peacock. I think I actually even used it in the sermon one time back then. But so this also comes with a badge, and the badge will say ESA trained. In other words, emotional support animal, ESA trained. So you can buy a badge, you get the vest, service dog vest, you get a badge that says ESA trained. And then underneath that, it'll say federally protected. And that comes obviously from the federal law. And then for $30, I found, and you may be able to get this cheaper, but for $30, you can fill out an online form. And there's not much to the form. And you will get certification saying that you are in need of a service animal. So, if the airline's charging $125, there's this cottage industry for under $50. You can get everything you need. You get the vest, you get the badge, and you get the medically authorized certificate for you saying that you need an emotional support animal. And then you can fly. And what happened is there was this kind of momentum that built. And those of you who have flown, you know that there's just this this proliferation of animals flying. I'm a dog lover. If I could have a dog, I'd have a dog. So I'm not anti-pet in any way. But what happened is ultimately people started thinking, hey, everybody's doing it. Why not? So airlines in 2018, there was this article that went out. This was kind of an in-house thing that got picked up in the news in 2018, but there was an airline article that went out. Actually, it was more than one article, but airlines were trying to figure out, how do we cope with this? And there was a report of the stuff that airlines were dealing with just in 2018. And they talked about on various United flights, there were ducks, pigs, monkeys, turkeys, snakes, and 250,000 service dogs and service cats in apparently in 2018 from the article I read. And all of those animals, all those ducks and pigs and monkeys and snakes and a peacock, all of them were labeled service animals. And good morning, Rox. And the article talked about the fact that about the incidents that were going on in the airline. Talked about the fact that there have been a few cases where passengers had been pretty badly mauled by dog. They talked about the fact that there were some flights where a dog was constantly barking or growling at other passengers. There were bites. There were numerous incidents of pooping and peeing. There were passengers who had allergy attacks. There were cases of kids who were absolutely terrified because they were very much afraid of dogs and have a dog, one row over. There were cases where an untrained but labeled service dog, an untrained service dog, would attack a trained service dog in a plane, and they had animal fights and blah, 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 blah. So the airline was really struggling to deal with this, not just one, but all of them. So finally, when Dexter the Peacock came in 2018, this woman tried to board a United flight with Dexter the Peacock, and the airline just said no and refused her. And of course, it made the news, etc. And as a result, some of the airlines started cracking down on the whole service animal thing. But the interesting thing is, back to this issue of trust, I look at this in some ways as the law of unintended consequences. You pass a law in 1986 that says you can't discriminate against people with physical or non-physical disabilities. Good thing. That should happen. The unintended consequence of that law is that a whole bunch of people started to think, well, we can take advantage of the system. And pretty soon you have hundreds of thousands of people saying, well, everybody's doing it, so why not? So pretty soon everybody's taking advantage. And people actually started to think that they're not even cheating anymore. They didn't even look at it as cheating, even though they kind of knew, that I'm taking advantage. They didn't look at it as cheating because everybody's doing it. And what breaks down, of course, is trust. It's no longer a society of, it's no longer a culture of trust. It's no longer the sense of if a person shows up with a service animal and is labeled, we simply trust that that's the case. Now we can't trust anymore. And so what happens is now there's, the airlines are cracking down and they're requiring more and more paperwork and more involvement in check-ins. And there's a guy that was interviewed, a guy named Tom Panek, P-A-N-E-K. He actually did an interview on, I think, CBS back in 2018. And he talked about the fact that he's blind, and he talked about how much more difficult it's becoming for him to have a service animal, because now he has to jump through more hoops to get all of the required certifications, as well as more difficulty in checking in, and people don't trust him anymore. The downside is the very people that this was meant to help, because the culture as a whole took advantage, we've now made life more difficult for the very people for whom the law was passed in the first place. And it's kind of sad that this is what's happened. And that's the story of Dexter the Peacock. And that's what got me thinking a little bit about just the culture of trust and what's necessary for a culture of trust. And I think in some ways, it's kind of simple. I don't know that we'll ever get back to it, to be honest with you. I don't know that we will. But there are two things that are required for a culture of trust, probably more than that. One, a culture of trust requires no hiding. It requires kind of a level of authenticity. And when you think about all of our institutions, that's what has been eroded in the last little while. It happens when, for example, pastors protect pastors. We saw that with all of the child abuse, the problems. We typically go right to the Catholic Church, but it's not just the Catholic Church. It was really a culture of pastors protecting pastors. It happened in cases I'm aware of in our denomination a couple decades ago, where pastors protected pastors. And of course, then the news comes out and trust is eroded for that institution. We all know that it happens when teachers protect teachers. It happens when police protect policemen. It happens when politicians protect politicians. It's across the board. It's not just one institution. It's all of them. And for trust to be rebuilt, it requires us just to be people who aren't going to hide, where we're simply going to tell the truth requires just a level of authenticity, a willingness to be upfront with what's gone wrong instead of trying to hide and protect. Just a willingness to say, here's the truth. It also requires, for the rest of us, it requires us a willingness to accept the confession and to accept an admission of wrong. And in our culture, what we tend to do is when something is wrong, when a person confesses, and this is one reason why people feel like they can't confess, we just automatically go into hang 'em mode. We want a person who says, hey, I've done something wrong. We want them to resign or to quit. And in some cases, there may be a few cases at times when that's absolutely necessary, when a person has broken trust and it's necessary. But very often we simply use, we will use evidence of a person's wrongdoing and say, go into hang 'em mode, which is one reason why people aren't authentic. So it requires for us to be a culture of, a willingness to listen to a confession, to listen to a story, and to make kind of an honest determination of whether or not this justifies. It's absolutely hard. And I agree, Andrea, I was going to end up with that, but it requires us as a culture to be able to listen to a confession, to recognize that, I'm a sinner myself. There are enough skeletons in my closet to recognize that I really need to listen to a confession and not jump right into hang 'em mode. At times, there are people that I've heard confessions from, and the legitimate response is, wow, you need to not be in that position. For various circumstances. Maybe, I've heard confessions from people who have talked about abuse of children, in which case the number one automatic response is you can't be around kids. And that, there's all kinds of issues with that. But two things when it comes to building a culture of trust. One is to have a culture of truthfulness and authenticity. And then two, a culture of a willingness to hear a confession without jumping right into hang 'em mode. And this gets back, Andrea commented about freedom. It really is true. The bottom line is, I think of Jesus and his comment, it's the truth that sets us free. And that isn't true just of individuals, it's true as a culture as a whole. Truthfulness brings freedom. And I go back to where we started. If we were a culture of trust, we'd be able to tell Amazon, drop the package on my front door, and I know it'll be there when I get home. And that's freedom. And that's what we've lost. We've lost freedom because we've lost truth and truthfulness. So for you and I, we're able to be people who can say, you know what, like Andrea is talking about, it's hard, it's painful. But in our marriages, in our neighborhoods, in our churches, in our communities, trust can be restored. It really can be restored. It can be rebuilt, and it needs to be rebuilt with a culture of truthfulness and a culture of grace. Jesus, I didn't think about this, but I go back all the time to my very favorite description of Jesus. When John, in John's gospel, he started his gospel by saying, Jesus came to us full of grace and full of truth. I think that's why people love them so much. Always told the truth, always gave grace. And that's what I aim for. I think we ought to aim for that too in our lives. So that's the story of Dexter the Peacock and what happens when a culture loses trust. So How about if I pray for all of us and pray that we'll be people of truth and trust. God, thanks for the day that you've given us today. God, I pray ultimately your people are intended to be a people of grace and truth, just like Jesus, a people who just give grace 100% of the time, and people who tell the truth 100% of the time. This is such a difficult thing for us, God. Some of us err on the side of grace, and some of us err on the side of truthfulness. God, I pray that you'll help us to be people who are able to do both, shape our character, mold who we are, give us the assurance, the self-security to be people who can tell the truth, and give us the courage also to be people who give grace to others. God, I pray that that will start with all of us individually, that we'll be people who do the hard thing and tell the truth, people who do the hard thing and give grace. I pray too for our culture, God. I pray for our leaders. I pray for men and women who are in situations where it seems like trust is so deeply eroded. And it's just tough to function anymore. Restore to us this ability to tell the truth and to give grace. God, I thank you for the people who are listening. I pray that you'd bless them, and that we be people who remember that ultimately you're a God of grace and a God of truth every single moment of our lives. And thank you for that. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All righty, everybody. Love you all and hope you have a great day.